Hello and welcome back to this Downplay Dualistic Crusade. This video is going to be my little talk and review about the really incredible novel you don't hear talked about very often. It was a book I didn't actually know existed until actually a short time ago, and that's 1942's The Adventures of Superman by the author George Lowther, who wrote for the Adventures of Superman radio series. This is technically, as far as I'm aware, it is the first novel adaptation of a comic book character. It was done, some people have claimed it was done as a way to promote the radio series and, of course, the comics in turn. But it's a really sort of strange outlier in the realms of comic book adaptations. It's a book that actually has some firsts in it for the world of Superman, and it definitely has the energy and feel of what you hear in the classic radio series and the Golden Age Siegel and Schuster comics of Superman, where he is still the social crusader, and of course the iconic Fleischer cartoons. So this is very much in my particular wheelhouse of a lot of the things I love about Superman. My particular favorite iteration, if I had to choose one, is the Golden Age Superman, where he is the social crusader and as immortalized by the classic Fleischer cartoons, which I still think is the definitive Superman adaptation, even though the stories themselves are very short, obviously, to fit in a theatrical short. That same spirit and energy is in this book, and I think it would be really rewarding for a lot of people who don't look at Superman as anything other than the big blue Boy Scout and kind of write him off as perhaps being less important than other characters because he is viewed as the sort of tried and true originator of a lot of tropes, and as so many people want to claim that Superman is boring when the reality is you have to be a lot more creative with the stories you write. You have to get more into bits of philosophy and you have to work a lot harder to make a Superman story work, I think, whereas where you have it can be a little bit easier to say write a Batman story because it is a human character, and you can much more easily get into that sort of mindset of writing for, obviously Bruce Wayne is not a normal person, but he's not a Kryptonian, so you have to work at it a little harder for a Superman story, I think. But it's the Golden Age Superman where you have this spirit of energy, where you have that sort of can-do attitude coming out of the Depression and the notion of being a crusader for social justice, and getting into the war years, you have propaganda stories and stories where Superman is helping with the war effort in various ways, as all comic characters did. And interestingly, that's what this book sort of delves into. Now, the book itself was written and published in 1942. It does retell the origin story, but the interesting bits here is that Lowther is the first person to actually name Superman's parents, Jor-El and Lara. It was a little different before that, but this is where you have the spelling of Jor-El as Jor-El and Lara, Lara. Before that, they were spelled a bit differently, so that's an interesting thing to see. It does start with the backstory on Krypton. It's over rather quickly because it's not a terribly long book, but it is a sort of different rendering of it. We have Jor-El presenting his findings to the council. It is a bit more realistically drawn, I think, than a lot of adaptations, because they don't just there is a little bit of politics there, and of course they don't believe him and they scoff at him, but it is presented in a rather realistic way, and they're not as, say, closed-minded as they're depicted in a lot of other adaptations in terms of the Kryptonian Council, in terms of how nasty it is or how overly politicized it is in the 1978 film. And this is very much in keeping with the sort of reading you get in Golden Age Superman and in the reading of the Kryptonian backstory in the radio series, what little bits we get. And I think this was sort of last, and it sort of became the influence for how the story was told when you get to the George Reeves Adventures of Superman television series. When they do tell the Kryptonian backstory, it's rather quick, but it is much like what you see in this book. And then we have baby Kal-El crashing on Earth, and we actually get introduced to the Kents for the first time, because if most people are probably unaware, Golden Age Superman started as He was not discovered by the Kents. He was actually discovered by a passing motorist and left at a nearby orphanage. If you know the classic introduction to the radio series and the Fleischer cartoons, it took a little while for the origin story to develop. So here we're introduced to the Kents, and they're pretty much like the Ma and Pa Kent that you think of, except it's not Jonathan and Martha. It's Eben and Sarah, I believe. Other than that, they are very much the Kent figures you think of, but it's rather strange seeing the different names since we're so used to the typical names for the Kents. But we do have the same sort of core beats, and there is a nice bit of character development, and I think this section of the book is probably the best and the most timeless in terms of this is where you get all the core themes of Superman, all the values that the Kents instill in young Clark, and it's told with such vigor and with a sort of energetic but honest and grounded feeling prose that it's very easy to read, and it's a very rewarding experience, I think, because this is where you get to the core of what the Superman character is, without any frills, without any bits of pondering. It is very direct and to the point, as you get the really in all Golden Age Superman. It's that same feeling where everything is direct to the point, but the core values are so strong. The core values of the character, the tenets of the character, are so strong and deeply rooted that there's a very universal quality that is what I think drew so many people to the notion of Superman as a character, and quickly endeared him in their hearts, and changed the publishing landscape, and really made the comic book erupt in popularity and start to take over the newsstand business away from the pulp magazines. So I think this book, it was a very rewarding thing for not just Superman fans, but I think it would be a great eye-opener for people who aren't necessarily fans of Superman, those who have never really dug into the character a bit deeper, or couldn't really connect with a lot of the more modern stories where they're sort of playing around with different things, and it's always how can Superman work in the modern world. I think it's very important to go back to the beginning and see what the core of the character is all about. So even though this story is sort of replaying the beats of the origin story that we all know at this time, for the first half, I'd say, for the first half of the book or so, the way it does it and the way that it allows you to sort of get that lived-in quality, and also from the period it was written, 1942, in the middle of the Golden Age, where all this stuff wasn't set in stone. There is some elasticity in the way that it's being presented. So it feels new. It is told a bit differently. So you'll go into this and you'll recognize the story beats, but the manner in which they happen, it keeps it fresh, and it's a fantastic reading experience. So after this, it's interesting to see how young Clark winds up getting to Metropolis and the Daily Planet. It is played out a little bit differently than what you're used to in a lot of the origin stories, but he gets there, and essentially, in a really nice touch, he's not immediately given a job. He's given what seems to be a smaller assignment to go and check out, and of course, he goes, and the idea is if he turns it into a story, he'll get a job on the planet as a reporter. But things don't go to plan, and of course what seems like a small thing turns into a much bigger caper and adventure. And this is where the book goes into more war propaganda material, because what seems to be a small story of a little port town sort of being menaced by a sort of basically there's some skullduggery going on under the guise of this small port town being menaced by stories of a ghost ship, essentially. So Clark Kent goes to this town, and it's essentially his sort of first time out in terms of using the dual identity and trying to uncover the truth. And he does do actual reporting work and detective work, but quickly it becomes apparent that this small town also is producing equipment for the Navy in the war effort, and these events seem to be tied into disrupting that, and it essentially evolves into at various points Superman versus secret enemy U-boats. So it is very much a wartime story, and it's actually told quite well in terms of how it's laid out. It seems rather plausible, actually, and then there are some really interesting action sequences that you can visualize, and the way it's written and structured, the last section of the book, this particular part, feels very much like it could have been a radio story for the Superman radio series, or it could have easily been made into one of the Fleischer cartoons, particularly the image of Superman diving and literally smashing a hole through a U-boat to try and sink it. It's just, there are lots of little action bits in the set pieces that I could just totally picture being done as a Fleischer cartoon. So there is a good deal of action in the last part of the book. It's told really well. Lois Lane is woven into the last 2/3 of the book rather nicely, and the beginnings of the Clark and Lois banter really start here. It's got a great pace to it, and the actual writing and the tone, it's sometimes described as like a juvenile novel. It does, maybe have a little bit of the flavor of one of the classic 1920s Hardy Boys original text by Leslie McFarlane, but it also, I don't know if it was necessarily written for kids. Adults can read it, teenagers can read it, but it's such a simple enough story, and it's so much fun that I don't think it really matters if it was originally intended as like a juvenile book. But apparently this book was serialized and sold in the Army Armed Forces book publication, and it was very popular. So apparently a lot of GIs had copies of this book during the war. So again, adults can read it. My only issue with the book is it just suddenly sort of stops at a point, and then that's just sort of it, because it's essentially, like I said, it could be considered like a radio script or a story for a Fleischer cartoon with the origin sort of put on front of it. But again, that's my only real qualm, is that it just suddenly stops and there weren't any more of these, because the book itself is well written, it's fun to read, and it clocks in at about 200 pages, but it is a very quick read. You get into it, and it's that sort of feeling of it being a freer story in terms of how it's being told, because there isn't all this long history of character lore to dig into. It's still the golden age where they're still sort of making things up as they go along and building on the comics and the radio series, just like the Fleischer cartoons introduced elements that were not there in the comics beforehand. That's the best part of this. It's a time capsule of Golden Age Superman. It introduces some new elements. It's a really fun, very quick read, and what's great about it is you can actually get the beautiful reprint edition from Applewood Books that they did, I believe, in 1995, which I have here on the shelf. So here is the Applewood Books printing. This book was out of print for a very long time, and even though you can't buy this new anymore, it's actually quite inexpensive on the used market. It's usually between $15 and $20, and sometimes you even see it on Amazon and other places. The beautiful original artwork has been recreated. This is a lovingly produced hardcover replica like Applewood did with their Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew editions. Here on the back is the explanation of what this book is and why it's important. So that was something Applewood always did. So if you were in a bookstore and you picked this up and you're like, well, what the heck is this? You could actually, figure out very quickly by reading the back. But that's not all. Another thing Applewood did with their replica reprints, if they were originally hardcover, they would replicate that. And here is the book without the dust jacket, with this beautiful image. The other key draw of this book is it is filled with original Joe Shuster illustrations for every chapter, actual like pencil line illustrations. But then it's also got some full color illustrations as well, which have been replicated in the book, and beautifully so. If you've ever looked at one of Applewood's reprints of the Hardy Boys original text, you'll know the level of quality and detail they went to. So this is replicating the original printing to every last detail except for the credit to Applewood, and this has a new introduction, which very well sets up the sort of book experience you're going to have, and it talks about some of the differences in Golden Age Superman and some of the elements that this book actually set up that then many other iterations of the character sort of took, and it became part of the Superman legend. Here's where you can find all of the Shuster illustrations. And every chapter has a beautiful drawing of Supes there. And you're reading the book and you find yourself just stopping and just staring intently at all of these little drawings, because this is the core DNA of the character. Then here is one of the full-page black and white drawings, and again with beautiful detail and sized and shaped like what you would see in a Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew book of this time in the 30s and 40s. But, as I said before, it's also got one or two color illustrations. And these are actually done on a piece of photo paper, so it's an actual beautifully done glossy piece of photo paper inside the book with full quality detail. Here, of course, is the rocket hurtling away from Krypton right before it explodes. If I hadn't convinced you that you might want to read this book, this illustration might, of Clark Kent looking at an actual skeleton crew coming off of a ghost ship. Let that sink in for a moment. You'll realize how much fun this book is. Here is the second color illustration of Superman saving a drowning dockhand. And if that wasn't enough, here is the other color illustration of Superman catching an artillery shell fired on Navy sailors by a surfaced U-boat. Again, this tells you the level of fun and action this book gets up to. And then the book pretty much ends with a sort of little gag and a wink at the audience, exactly like a lot of the classic radio episodes and just like one of the classic Fleischer cartoons. So again, when I was reading this, that was exactly what I pictured. So you can easily imagine this as being a sort of lost Fleischer cartoon story in terms of the second half of the book once it gets into the new story it's telling. But the origin, the version of the origin that it tells is really well done, and it's, again, getting to the core of the character values without the long back history sort of dictating how things are going to go. That feeling of freedom in the writing to obviously have the story beats, but you're one of the first people telling this story, so you don't have 50 to 60 plus years of back history to weigh you down when you're writing it. I think this is essential for all comic book fans because it is part of the early development of the medium, really, and the core character of Superman. But it's a must for Superman fans. I mean, this is the DNA of the character laid bare. It's a fantastically fun read. It's a very quick read, too. And this Applewood edition is beautifully reproduced. This is a must just for the illustrations alone. I mean, it's like you have a piece of history in your hands, which you really do. It's a shame, I think, that they didn't continue doing novels. And obviously, it would have been great had there been some Golden Age Batman novels. We could have had books of Batman murdering people, like 1939 Batman. But anyway, when I heard about this, I knew I would have to read it. And I was very happy that you can still find the Applewood edition, this beautiful replica, for a very inexpensive price. You can get this cheaper than you can a lot of modern comic book trades and things. So it's I think a must for any comic fan. It's a must for any Superman fan, and it's just a fun read. It really is a time capsule of when it was written and where Superman was at the time in the golden age of comics. And it really is a nice bit of escapism because the purity of the storytelling and the purity of the spirit of the Superman character is really intense, and it hooks you from page one. Again, It's a very quick read, and it's this beautiful replica edition from Applewood, which again, you can still find on the used market for a very inexpensive price. So that's my thoughts on reading the beautiful Applewood Books version of Adventures of Superman. It's a fascinating artifact from the golden age of comics. It's a book that rarely gets discussed, and again, to be quite frank, I only found out about it about a year ago. I was reading some article that happened to reference it, and in terms of some of the stuff that it introduced to the Superman mythos, and I found myself going, wait, there's a Superman novel from the 40s? What? And it's tied to the radio series. I was like, I've got to find this. And of course, I found it was, a very rare book and long out of print. And thankfully, I discovered that Applewood did a reprint. And again, you can look it up on eBay or even Amazon. It's about $15. It's an absurdly cheap price for the beautiful reprint quality that Applewood did. So I think the incredible quality of the printing and the very cheap price and the importance to the history of the development of Superman makes this an absolute must for anyone that might be interested in either the development of comic book characters, pulp fiction, classic adventure fiction, or Superman. It's a wonderful read and a true artifact of the Golden Age Superman character. So as always, I hope this has been fun, at least somewhat informative, and if you're interested, I hope you can track down a copy of this beautiful Applewood printing. It's just a beautiful hardcover edition with the gorgeous artwork, and reproduces the original cover artwork, and the book sort of transports you back to that Golden Age mindset. It's a fantastic experience, and I think extremely rewarding for all Superman fans. As always, I want to say, keep supporting your local independent bookstores, keep reading print books, and thanks ever so much for watching.